Hi everybody, this is Mom. Today we're going to make stromboli. Okay, so we're going to make a triple batch of the stromboli bread, which will end up with 3 strombolis because of that. So we're going to need 3 packages of active dry yeast, 6 cups of flour, a few dashes of salt, 2 cups of warm water, 7½ teaspoons of vegetable oil, and 1 tablespoon sugar. Okay, so first we want to measure the yeast. I start off with water that's about 125 to 130 degrees. I test this by feeling the temperature of the water. It just stings a little bit. It's the point where you don't want to really hold your hand under there real long, but you can tell it's really nice and hot. So I need 2 cups of that temperature of water, so I just take it right out of the sink at that temperature. Okay, so I check that measurement. That looks good. Now, the recipe calls for 1 tablespoon sugar, and I'm going to add that right here to the yeast mixture because yeast eats sugar and it helps it to rise. Now, I like to use bulk yeast, and the recipe calls for 3 packages of bulk yeast. So for 1 package is about 2½ teaspoons of yeast. So of course, 1 tablespoon is 3 teaspoons, so I do just a hair less than a tablespoon, and I do that the 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Okay, now I'm going to stir that in with the sugar, and we're just going to let it sit there a little bit. This is called proofing the yeast. This is to make sure that the yeast will rise once it's in the recipe. So I'm just getting it mixed in really well, and in a few minutes we should see some bubbles on top, and that will let us know that the yeast is ready. I'm going to let this sit about 5 minutes to make sure that it will rise correctly. While the yeast is rising, I'm going to add the flour and salt and oil to my mixing bowl. So to measure flour, you just measure it lightly into the measuring cup and scrape it off without packing it. So that, of course, is 6 times. Okay, so that was 6 cups of flour, and to that I'm going to add 1 batch is a dash of salt. So for 3 batches, I'm going to do a little less than a 1/4 teaspoon. I use sea salt, and so I always try to do a little less than what it calls for because sea salt is very potent. Now the recipe calls for 7½ teaspoons of vegetable oil. That, of course, again, 3 teaspoons is a tablespoon, so I'm going to do 2 tablespoons, which equals the 6 teaspoons. 1, 2, and then I have another 1½ left over, so I just estimate 1/2 tablespoon of oil. Use the same container, don't have to get everything dirty. So there's the oil. So the yeast has risen quite nicely. As you can see, there's a nice foam on the top there. So that's all we need to add yet. We'll add it to our flour, salt, and oil mixture. Now I'm using a Bosch with a dough blender on it. So now I'm going to turn it on so it'll be noisy, but I'm going to let it go for about 10 to 15 minutes. We are just a few minutes into the kneading, but I just wanted to show you how the edges are cleaned off and it's still sticky in the middle. That's what you're looking for. That's the right consistency, where the edges are cleared and the middle is sticky. We'll continue kneading now. So while your dough is kneading, I like to do the measuring of the spices, and I measure it in bulk so that I can put it in a shaker container and use it again in the future, so you don't have to measure it every single time. Alright, so the first thing it says is 2½ teaspoons flaked basil. I just have another shaker jar left over that's empty now, so 2½ teaspoons would be 5 teaspoons. So again, we need our tablespoon here. Okay, so again, 5 teaspoons would be 1 tablespoon, which is 3 teaspoons. And you just put it down in the jar like this, plus 2 teaspoons. Okay, there's 1. And 2. So that's the basil leaves. Then 2 teaspoons of flaked oregano, again doubled, is 1 tablespoon and 1 teaspoon. One tablespoon and 1 teaspoon. Actually, I think that's exactly what I have in there. Alright, then the marjoram is a ½ teaspoon, which we're again doubling to 1 teaspoon. Okay, whoops. Alright, so we'll add that. And then the flaked thyme is only an 1/8 teaspoon, so for that we need a 1/4 teaspoon. And that is the thyme. And there we go. So now we just put that together in the jar. Oops, I need the lid. And you shake it up and you can use it for your filling later. Okay, so it's gone about 12 or 13 minutes now. As I'm looking at this, I see that this is really a small batch. Even though it is a triple batch, it's not a very large amount of dough, at least for this mixer. So I've prepared the countertop here. I just wipe it off with a wet washcloth and sprinkle flour over it. That helps it to stay where you put it. So now I'm going to dump this dough right here on my prepared countertop. So here it goes. It's a little bit sticky, which is okay because I'm going to knead it just a little bit more and it will add a little flour to it, so it's just right about this time. Alright, so the dough is a little sticky, which is okay because a sticky dough does make a good bread. So I'm just going to knead it just a little bit more, which does use a little bit more flour and takes a little bit of the stickiness away. Because the small batch doesn't knead really well in the Bosch, and I didn't have the small dough blender on it. Alright, so this feels pretty good. Now I'm going to show it a test to see if you're done kneading. The test is you break off a small piece of dough and you pull it. If it stretches without breaking, you're done. Obviously, I'm not done. It didn't stretch, it was breaking, so I'm going to knead it a little bit more. Okay, so I've been kneading this for a few minutes now. It seemed to take a lot more flour than I expected. I think that my small dough blender is needed next time. So it is doing much better. It's not breaking right apart. So I'm going to knead it back into a nice ball. My flour here on the surface. And then it says to let rest for 20 minutes. So I'm going to let it sit right here on the counter. Cover it with a towel. See you in 20 minutes. So next on the recipe, we're going to need an egg wash. So while this is rising, I'm going to make the egg wash. Basically, it's just an egg whipped up like this. And it's going to help seal the dough together. It also gives a nice crispy crust. So you'll be seeing this later on. So now we just add 2 tablespoons of water. 1, 2, and we whisk that together, and then we have an egg wash. Just want to whip some air into it. And that should be now good. The dough has risen for 20 minutes. And I'm going to cut it in thirds. Alright, so I want about the same amount of dough for each stromboli. So, one I'm going to work with, the other two I'm going to set aside, but I don't want to set them too close to each other because they'll rise and be hard to take apart. Alright, so we'll just cover those with a towel while we work with this one. Alright, so we're wanting a rectangle 18 inches by 12 inches. And believe it or not, I actually measure it so I get it the right thickness. Okay, so this is about 12 by 18 inches. Of course, it's not a perfect rectangle, but that's about how it looks. Okay, so the first layer is cheese. And what I want to do is put the cheese right down the middle of the dough, like this. This is mozzarella shredded cheese. Okay, that's the first layer. Second layer is the spices that we mixed up before and I just put in this shaker jar. It's about a half a teaspoon, which of course I'm not measuring. I'm just lightly spreading it over the cheese. That's for the flavor. The next layer is the meat, which for this one I'm going to put pepperoni. So I like to put the pepperonis pretty much touching. Of course, it makes it taste better when you have more flavor like that. Okay, now it's time for the egg wash. I just have a pastry brush here, and I just brush the egg wash right here on the top part of the dough, just kind of like painting it on. It also says to put it on the fillings. I guess it's sort of like an edible glue. Alright. So now I want to pick up the edges and fold it over. So now I'm going to fold that over and seal it down where the egg wash was. Okay, I'm just going to pinch these holes together, which won't matter a whole lot because this is the inside. Now I just repeat what I did before. Second layer, right down the middle like we did before, is the cheese. And then the seasoning. And another layer of pepperoni. Okay, so there we go with pepperoni. Now egg wash again on the plain side where I want it to stick to the ingredients. Alright. So you just stretch it over and seal the edges. So now we're ready to put it on the pan. I'm just going to spray 3 stripes on the pan because that's where the 3 strombolis will go. And I need to loosen this from the cupboard countertop, and then we will set it on the pan to rise. There we go. Okay, now I'm working on the second one. I've rolled it out and I have put the first layer of cheese and the second layer of fillings, of spices. So now I'm putting ham on this one, and you can lay the ham out straight if you want. I like to have it a little more broken up so it's not just strips in there, but that's what I'm doing here. That's number 2, just 1 to go. One thing we need to do yet is pierce it with a fork. I'll just show you that now. You just pierce it all the way through with a fork. It sort of blends all the ingredients together. And it also gives steam holes for it to bake properly. Okay, so this is the third one. I'm just finishing up with the egg wash on the last layer. As you can see, it's half cheese, half pepperoni. We like to make everybody their favorites in our family. So you could also add Italian sausage or browned ground beef or chicken, or you could even go into the taco flavorings and add whatever you want to this stromboli. But just use whatever fillings you like. Okay, so there's the third one. And just get our steam holes here. And we're going to give an egg wash to the whole thing. It'll give it a nice crispy crust. And helps use up the rest of the egg. Again, this was 1 egg and 2 tablespoons of water. You can also use milk if you like. I just chose water. So after this, it's going to sit and rise for 30 minutes. And then we're going to bake it for 30 minutes. And then it will be supper time. So I decided to just sprinkle a little Parmesan cheese on top. I really kind of wanted to put it inside, but I forgot about it. So guess what? Now it's on the top. I don't think it will affect it too much, and it might add a little interest to the finished product. So the oven is preheated to 375. This has risen now for 30 minutes. Now we stick it in the oven for 25 to 30 minutes until it's browned on top. So let's just check on this. Ah, it looks delicious. There it is, just about 30 minutes. And it is ready to serve. We're also heating up a pasta sauce so we can serve that along with it and dunk it in there, and that's how our family likes to eat it. And it is supper time.